let me give you the background, guys. Here's what happened. I post a tweet on Twitter, and next thing you know, I've got 20 plus notifications. And I'm like, what's this about? And usually that happens when I get tagged in somebody else's tweet, and there's a lot of replies on it. You know, a lot of discussion. But I go and look, and there's a bunch of people replying to my tweet. A bunch of people that wanted to discuss what I had to say. I was like, what did I even tweet? Okay, I wanted you guys to know my tweet process. All right, so to put together my tweets, I listened to my sermons from the previous weeks, and I utilize that to try and help me get better. I critique myself, try to get better understanding of how my sermon went and how my preaching went. And whenever I get an idea while I'm watching my sermon, I put it down as a potential tweet. And so I'll be listening and watching. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good point. I'll pause and I'll try to type up a tweet out of the idea I have. So I kind of batch them and I just come up with them as I go. Well, I had put together a tweet on my sermon on Ecclesiastes 3:11. I just kind of blasted it out there and then went about my day, went about my business. And usually what happens is I blast out a tweet. I get a handful of likes from other people in our Christian streaming communities, and then maybe a handful of retweets, and that's it. That's how they usually go. So let me show you guys the tweet, and I'll tell you what I intended. And I've got two ideas on what I want to do during our discussion this evening. The first thing is I want to walk you through the process of how I determine what's worth responding to and what's not. Okay? I want to take some time to do that. Why? I spent over 6 hours trying to reply to people, engage with people, have discussions, etc. And that was only a handful of the responses. So I believe there's a lot of wisdom that needs to be taking place when we're discussing with people, especially over controversial topics. And I want to give you guys my basic approach when it comes to talking with those who believe differently than us. I want to walk you through my thought process as I was engaging and interacting with people, where I thought it's worthwhile to go in depth and where I thought maybe I'll just hold back, it might not be worth it. Okay, and I'm just going to tell you why I engaged with that person, why I chose not to engage with them, etc. And I could be wrong with all of these things, but I think a lot of people don't know where to begin because as a matter of practical wisdom, they've never really engaged with people on this level. And so that's my first hope. My second hope is a lot of key ideas came out of the discussions. There were some key themes that people were bringing up as they critiqued my tweet. And I think those key themes are actually going to be helpful for our interactions with atheists if you can think about these ideas as being problematic in some way, shape, or form. So let me show you the tweet. So I said this in the sermon. I've heard many atheists speak of the courage and bravery they had to finally deny God and an afterlife. This language is going to be important. What did they deny? To finally deny God and an afterlife. Why does this seem like a triumph to them? It is because it goes against their very nature. God has put eternity into the heart of man. Ecclesiastes 3:11. So that's the tweet. Now here's something that's important to recognize. There are only a certain number of characters you can utilize to assign a tweet, right? You can't keep explaining yourself thoroughly and perfectly. And I want you to know almost all of my tweets are on the character limit, right? They're usually within 10 characters of the character limit. And this one is no exception. And I have just a confession. When I tweet, I usually try to tweet bigger ideas, and they often don't fit in the character limit. So I kind of walked myself into a problem here. But I didn't mean to. It's just how I naturally go about tweeting, okay? So I want to explain in more words, and I want you to know that most of my people that responded to this did not have the luxury of hearing my explanation of what I intended. What I intended to communicate is this. There are a number of atheists that I listened to who basically say that I know that you have a fear of an afterlife, but if you can overcome that fear, then you're going to do well, right? And not only that, it takes a special courage, it takes a special bravery to finally overcome the fear of there being no afterlife. But once you do it, then you're good to go. Once you do it, oh man, we've finally arrived, okay? Like I said in the tweet, it's a triumph. And I'm just going to give an example here. This is from a discussion on Matt Dillahunty's show, The Atheist Experience. This is a caller calling in, and they're talking about how they're struggling with the idea of an afterlife, okay? So this is what I was aiming at. Listen to the conversation and just notice Dillahunty's approach to an afterlife.
A bit of a relief of no hell stuff. So you're coming at it from that point of view. But
well, not just that. It's not just a relief that there's no hell. I'm relieved that I have no reason to believe there's a heaven or a hell, and I find both empowering and relieved.
Okay, did you hear that? I have no reason to believe there's a heaven or a hell, i.e. no afterlife, and I find that to be both empowering and relieving, okay? And it's that empowering aspect that intrigued me. That's what I was trying to address with the tweet. This perspective that when I finally embraced there was no afterlife, I was empowered and relieved. How did I put it in my tweet? Courage and bravery to deny what? God and an afterlife, okay? That's how I put it. I felt empowered. I felt relieved. He had courage. He had bravery to do this sort of thing, etc. And I've heard this as well from not just Dillahunty, but I've also heard it from Dawkins. He finally took that step of embracing it, and it was incredibly courageous and brave for him to do so, okay? Now, there's a reason I'm going into all of this, because I was misinterpreted. A lot of people thought that this is what I was addressing, and I'm just going to give it another example, okay? This is from richarddawkins.net. The Converts Corner. This is by Gone Calves. Don't know who that is, but they said this. My most proud achievement so far in my short 34-year lifespan has been escaping religion. Though there are many different influential characters on YouTube that help me to do this, Richard Dawkins has been the most influential. Growing up in a heavily religious family, the way I did, never left any room for me to think for myself and to wonder or even discover things. It was so difficult to get out of that religious mentality, and most of all, it was really difficult to say goodbye to that friend in my head, God. But once I did, it was incredibly liberating. I now see the world in such a wonderful view that it makes me emotional simply looking at a tree. How incredibly determined life is to succeed, and the length of the processes it took to do so. I will continue to quench my thirst for this universal knowledge and try to pass it on to my 2-year-old son in hopes that it will fulfill his life the way it has been fulfilling for mine thus far. Thank you, Professor Richard Dawkins, Gone Calves. What I'm getting at is I intended to communicate the courage, the bravery, the relief, the empowerment that some atheists had just described as receiving when they embraced that there was no afterlife and that they took a real step of triumph, right? Why does this seem like such a triumph to them? Most people heard me saying, why do people who are coming from a heavily religious family and waving goodbye to their family to embrace atheism, why do they find it empowering? Do you see the difference here? And it's this misunderstanding that contributed to a lot of the responses. You'll see this theme throughout as we discuss. Incredibly important to recognize that we spoke past each other at this point. How common is this in online arenas? How common is this in online space to talk past each other, right? They thought they heard me saying one thing, i.e. criticizing people like Gone Calves, when in reality, I was remarking on a perspective that I have heard enumerated from the likes of Richard Dawkins and Dillahunty, etc. Okay. The other thing I want you to see is the second half of my tweet contains self-evidently Christian theology built into it, right? I make a claim, right? The first half of my tweet is an observation. Hey, I've heard many atheists speak of the courage and bravery they had. Why does this seem like a triumph? The second half, I try to answer that using Christian theology. It is because it goes against their very nature. God has put eternity in the heart of man. This is an Ecclesiastes 3:11 thing, and we'll see later, this is a Romans 1 thing as well. That is where I was going with it, right? God has put eternity into our hearts, i.e., in a Romans 1 sort of way, we have a knowledge and understanding of God. And in reality, this was very problematic for the atheists, that I would interpret their experience through the lens of my Christian theology. Many of them were very offended that I would make this sort of claim here. So that was very interesting as well. Now, again, I want to do two things in our discussion tonight. First, I want to walk through the tweets and tell you why I engage and don't engage at certain levels. Just a practical, almost guide to how to know when to proceed and how to know when to back off. Okay? That's the first thing I want to do. And we're going to walk through the majority of the tweets, and I'm just going to tell you what was going through my mind as I engaged. I also, during that discussion, want to talk a little bit about why should you engage at all? Why should you reach out to people? And that's going to inform some of my discussion. Again, I spent over 6 hours responding to people on Twitter, when normally I just blast off an answer and leave. The second thing is I want to go through some of my learnings from engaging with atheists and some of the things that really irritated them, and some of the things where we were talking past each other, some of the things where we were misunderstanding each other. Okay? That's my goal tonight. So, without further ado, let's walk through the tweets. Many of these tweets are not family friendly. Okay? Now, I will not say any curse words out loud, but they will be on the screen. I just want you guys to know that's there. It's going to happen. I think it's inevitable if you're going to engage in conversations and discussions with people who believe differently than you. You know, why? Because they're not going to believe the same as you about these sorts of things. Why spend time engaging in these discussions and in these debates? Okay. Why reach out to people? It takes a lot of time, after all. I told you I took over 6 hours responding to people, having a discussion, going back and forth. I've thought of this before almost in a way. There's a meme, right? Somebody is wrong on the internet. Everyone to arms, you know. Regardless of who is wrong, there seems to be a tendency to really waste a lot of time on the internet arguing with people who disagree with you. I think one of the first and most important reasons is to learn, okay? You have so much you can learn from engaging with people who believe differently than you. You have so much to learn from talking with people who have a different perspective and mindset than you. And if you will go into the conversation thinking of it that way, I have a lot to learn here. I can pick up some ideas. I can see things from a different perspective. That is going to be so helpful to you, irrespective of whether or not you feel like you're making progress in the conversation, irrespective of whether or not you think that they're going to be convinced by you or you're going to be convinced by them or any of that. And you'll see this theme come out as I show you the tweets and how I engaged with them. Because there were a lot of them I chose to drill down deep with because the individual seemed thoughtful and like they could teach me something. And there were some conversations I just cut off because they didn't feel thoughtful and it didn't feel like I could learn something. I think first and foremost, we're trying to learn. Hear what they have to say, understand their perspective, and that's going to give you so much going forward because you are going to have a better idea of what somebody who believes differently than you thinks directly from their mouth. Second, to help set a good example. Let's be honest, guys. I've seen a lot of Christians engaging in apologetics in the marketplace, and they don't often do a very good job. Okay? And I'm not criticizing anyone in particular, but I think all of us have seen a Christian where we kind of cringe a little bit. If we go out and seek to engage with somebody in the best way we possibly can, we set a good example. Set a good example for others. We set a good example for Christ. We set a good example for Christians. Okay? If more Christians engaged in a thoughtful and ironic manner, then I think there would be a lot less caricaturization of Christians. We would be able to have a better conversation, a better discussion across the board. Why? Because they've engaged with Christians before and they found Christians to be very thoughtful, understanding, and loving. Well, is that typically what happens? No. And so, even if you're leaving just a little mark on the universe, which can be a positive interaction with somebody, I think it's valuable. Okay? And I think you can set a good example by doing that. Finally, guys, this is the third point. And notice I put it third. We also engage in this way to witness or testify, i.e. to evangelize, to spread our faith. When we defend our worldview in the marketplace of ideas, people consider it. People ask themselves, does that make sense? Do I think that's reasonable? And they might in the future consider Christianity. Okay? So it's helpful for that. But notice I put it third. I really do think these are in order of importance. I really do. What this means is if the individual you're talking to doesn't seem compelled by your arguments, it's not as though you've failed. You could be learning from the conversation. You could be setting a good example. You never know who else is reading. You never know what else they might be thinking about the situation. So yeah, you're witnessing and testifying, but I think that's the third thing, because I don't think a lot of people are going to be completely convinced by a single thread they read on Twitter. I think more often than that, it's going to be a combination of interactions with others that really compel them. So, I typically ask myself as I'm going through this, who am I talking to here and what is their level of openness? And of course, can I learn anything from this engagement? As I'm asking myself those questions, that's the rubric I'm using to engage with people or not engage with people. And so what I'd like to do now is walk through the majority of the Twitter engagements and point out to you guys which ones I felt were really compelling and made me want to respond. And I'll try to just give you my mind on why. So this is a bit of a case study. Here are the principles I use to decide whether or not to engage. And now let's look at specific instances of whether or not I engaged, and let me tell you why. So Jonathan says, it's because honesty is something Christians in some areas like to punish. But go ahead and tell us about how the Bible is true because it says so in the Bible, or dance around the topic like a dishonest man. Your call. So when I first read this, obviously the second remark is a little bit fiery, but you got to recognize, guys, that Christians and atheists are always throwing darts at each other in these realms. Okay. So I read that and I took it for what it is. What can I learn here? What can I learn here? He thinks that Christians are dishonest. Okay, fair enough. Now, he did take a pot shot at me. Am I going to call that out? Maybe, maybe not, depending upon the situation. I ignored a lot of shots that people took at me, but I also called some people out on the shots that they took at me as well. And I'm going to try to give you the balance there. I do not think a good Christian approach is always Jesus meek and mild, never going to be disagreeing, never going to call anybody out. You need to do that on a careful basis. You need to ask yourself, am I going to call this person out? Am I just going to leave it? Am I going to ignore it? Those are the things you need to consider, okay? Now, here's how I responded. I thought his first comment was helpful, and so I wanted to encourage that, and I also felt like I understood why he put his second comment, but I wanted to call him out on it in a very subtle way. So this is what I said. I don't disagree. Honesty is something I prize very highly. The truth has nothing to fear, but many Christians are afraid the truth will prove their religion false, so they bury their heads in the sand instead. Okay, so I kind of granted, hey, I want you to know I'm about honesty as well. But I did add this. I'm not sure how to respond to the second half of your comment. I was just kind of saying, hey, that was a little bit out of line without telling him that's a little bit out of line. You see what I mean? And notice how he reacted. The second half was preemptively petty. Thanks for your honesty. Look at that. Jonathan, completely granted. He was just like, yep, you know what? You caught me. Thanks for your honesty. Appreciate that. So not everyone who takes a shot is a hater. You see what I mean? And he owned it immediately. And I said, fair enough. And I threw him a little bone too. Fair enough. Given the previously mentioned state of Christians, I don't blame you for preempting. There we go. Hey, I want you to know I'm not bothered by that. I don't hold that over your head. I don't hold it against you, right? So this I thought was a fairly good interaction, and we had that back and forth where he just granted, yeah, I was being petty beforehand. I'm used to a lot of Christians coming on here and not having a positive conversation. That was a bit of the back and forth on that one, okay? Timothy Strange, he and I also had a very good discussion. I want you to see how he started. He said, nah, it's because so many Christian communities are negative or even abusive towards people leaving the faith. And I chose to engage with him a lot, actually. You can see lots of back and forth. While this may regrettably be true, I simply suggest there's more to it than that. So what I'm saying in my tweet is, hey, I can understand that there's some internal pressure to leave or external pressure to leave, but I think also that it's a little bit deeper than that as well. Why? Because I'm a Christian. And he says, fair. And that immediately made me think, okay, this guy might be worth engaging. Fair. Wouldn't it make more sense to attribute and blah, blah, blah. We go on. I'll come back to this a little bit later. Okay. But again, I engaged with him throughout my comment and he went with it. He was like, all right, that's fair. And let's go a little bit back and forth. So great discussion with Timothy Strange. Show is on our team. He says these replies are telling. And I just put, let's see if I can learn something. Because I do think that's my first approach. Here is Sarah. Sarah says, for me, it didn't take courage. It was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. It was a long, slow process because often falling back into old patterns seems to be easier but never lasts. Besides, I find atheists to be much more Christ-like. That struck me as just a very fair and honest comment. No, nothing to fight with there, right? Sarah shared their story. I appreciate it, and I told them as much. Now, Simply Secular Dave said this: the courage and bravery usually isn't related to God. It is the courage to speak up and say the words "I'm free" to their family, friends, and people in their lives, some of whom also had found the truth of the myth, but were pressured to fake it for fear of social repercussions. Again, pretty good comment. Obviously, the myth, there's a lot of loaded language that's built into some of these comments, the myth, the lies, etc. And I choose to just roll with those. I put, this is very thoughtful, I can understand the sentiment, and we got into a good conversation. Okay? Boom. So it's been great thus far. Now, Steven, he was a little more feisty. What did he say? Phony, phony, phony. It took courage because it meant facing scorn, hostility, rejection from family, friends, neighbors who were still part of the faith community, the community of believers who idolatrous primary faith in their sacred book. So this was a little bit more attacking, right? But I did choose to take this one in stride. This one, I didn't fire back. I didn't call him out on his phony, phony, phony or anything like that. I just took it in stride and I kept going. So I responded to him in kind as well. This one, it takes bravery and courage to come out against years of indoctrination by family, friends, schools, and churches. We'll talk about this later, but indoctrination comes up over and over and over again, right? They mostly realized it was a crock years before, but the final steps are often the hardest. Okay. I challenged them a little bit, right? I made a comment on, I don't think that that's the whole story. So I kind of made a comment regarding this to kind of push back a little bit. Bonsai says, it's a triumph if it undoes years of indoctrination. We see that term again. Many folks are told from childhood, God is real, hell is real, you'll burn forever if you turn from God. Realizing what nonsense that is and being willing to walk away takes a great deal of courage. Gods aren't real. Okay? So you can see a little bit more fiery. Okay, the gods aren't real, realizing what nonsense, etc. But again, I can't blame him, right? That's his worldview. And so I challenged him a little bit. That's one way of reading the evidence. Another way is that it's difficult to suppress the sense of eternity that God places into your heart, right? And I was just pointing out that that's what, you have one approach or one read, but, there's another way of interpreting it, okay? So, again, I kind of challenged without, I think, being too negative. Here was one that I thought was very, very interesting. And again, we'll talk about this later. You could have tried having an actual conversation with atheists to get at the reasons and reach understanding. Instead, you went with assuming things that fit your beliefs. I can't tell if that's because you're trying to avoid questioning or trying to play to an audience. Okay. Now on this one, the only reason I kept responding is because of the second half. I can't tell if that's because you're trying to avoid questioning or trying to play to an audience. This statement at least seemed to me that Kara was trying to understand where I was coming from. Although I really disagreed with her first two sentences, this statement to me seems like they were trying to understand where I was coming from, and so I did respond. Now, I did challenge her. The first half, I kind of didn't feel like where it was coming from, and here's the problem, is you could have tried having an actual conversation with atheists. I do that, right? I do that. And get at their reasons to reach understanding. Yeah, I do that. Instead, you went with assuming. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Again, the tweet has statement of fact or observation in the first half, and then a Christian interpretation of that data, second half. There's nothing wrong with that. So, this is how I put it. Maybe this was too harsh, but like I told you, I don't think Mika Mild all the time, Jesus, where I don't challenge anybody, I don't think that's always appropriate. So here's what I said. Kara, no offense, but you don't know anything about me. I was an atheist and converted in college. I have conversations with atheists regularly on my stream. Just because I have noticed something and have a different read of the evidence doesn't mean that I'm assuming. I don't know if that was too harsh or not, but I thought that was fair because she literally doesn't know that I used to be an atheist. She literally doesn't know that we talk with atheists all the time in the chat. And so I did talk to atheists, and it's not just that I ignorantly hold to my beliefs, and that's why I came to the conclusion I came to. Okay. So I challenged her a little bit, but I did respond because of that last sentence they put. Okay, let's continue. Now, Bo says, no, it's because many former Christians lived a life of fear of going to hell, fear of the rapture, that it came during the night, they missed it, etc. A huge number of atheists describe the act of discarding their faith as a relief, a giant weight off their shoulders. And I just replied, this makes sense, thanks for sharing. A lot of people, at this point, I'm seeing a lot of people have the same comment, and I'm trying to have a better understanding, right, as I go about it. Now, here's another interesting one. Alistair says, I'd never say that. For me, it was like dumping in the bin a rotting lettuce I'd forgotten was at the back of the fridge. Obviously, the second half of the comment is a shot that he's trying to take. But the first half of the comment is relevant. He's saying My interaction was different. My approach was not what you described in your tweet. And this is a theme we're going to see over and over again as well. My approach is different than yours. I think differently about this than the atheists you were interacting with. Therefore, you're wrong. We're going to see that more and more. So I made a slight comment, but I didn't go a lot further. Archaeologian, whatever this is. Unfortunately for many, it is not as simple as denying God. It is not just about leaving superstition and ignorance behind. Many people risk losing family and friends. Some even risk losing their lives. The bravery is not in denying some second-rate pantomime villain. He was doing so good. And then he called our God a second-rate pantomime villain. Again, I ignored the shot he took, and this makes sense, and I tried to offer some additional advice. This guy says, you're quoting Ecclesiastes. The irony is pretty overwhelming. Like, he's kind of wants me to guess at something, okay? So I just said, I'm not sure how. I've been preaching through it. And then he just says, it's my favorite book. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So, worth a small interaction, but not a whole lot deeper. Aaron says, you're almost right. And he talks about his experience and how he left, but it didn't feel like a triumph to him. It felt like slowly receding into the darkness. That's how he put it. The night is darkest just before the dawn, he said. And he said that's how it felt for him. And I said, hey, thanks for sharing, especially because you offer a different opinion. Now, Shattered said this. The issues we face when coming out as atheists after struggling for years with our faith and the fact that we've been lied to are why we are courageous and brave. The fact that marriages have been destroyed, parents have been disowned by children, that's why we who were believers, and in my case, a pastor, we are courageous and brave. That's why we have courage and bravery. Not because of what is written in your mythology. Again, how many tweets now have you seen where we're talking past each other? I mentioned it at the beginning. I have never said that it should be easy to leave your friends and family, right? And that comes up over and over in these conversations. I never said that was easy. My point was that there's an internal struggle that the individual is wrestling with as well. The imprint of eternity on their heart and the fact that God has revealed to himself to the hearts of men, right? That is part of what I am driving at, okay? So Shattered, we go back and forth a little bit again. Worth engaging. Ben was very good, and we'll bring this up a little bit later when we talk about specifics. But Ben says this, coming out as an atheist can cause one to lose family, friends, jobs, because Christians are so intolerant of anyone who thinks differently than them. Again, intolerance thrown right in there. Anyone who thinks differently than them. That's why it's a triumph. It has nothing to do with their nature. Statements like this are a big part of the problem, right? This feels forward at first, but when I started interacting with him, we had a great and enlightening conversation. I'll come back to this one later. Now, here's one. I know I've been showing a lot of good conversations. Here's one where I thought twice and then I replied, but this is a toss-up, right? Stephen's response is, what God? What God? He reads my tweet and his response is, what God? Now, he's obviously making an assertion here. There is no God. That's what he's saying. God doesn't exist. What are you making all these claims about God for? But given the context of my tweet, is this profitable to engage in? Like the guy he came in and said, it's like he put, I don't believe in God. And it's like, yeah, not very helpful. Okay? Not very helpful. And I put, albeit the one true God of the Bible. And then he said this, no joke, common mistake. That's the answer to which God do you believe exists. I'm asking what God? This is an entirely different question. So I call him out. At this point. Now, this one could have been ignored, okay? You could have ignored this one and not spent your time on it, right? At this point, what is he doing? He says, what God? I say, albeit the one true God of the Bible. And he says, common mistake. What's he doing? Semantics. He's playing semantics with me. It's like when your child asks you, can I have a can of soda? And you say, may you have a can of soda? Now, you might be setting them up in the future to be able to use language more particularly, but you can tell here, this guy just wants to play semantics, right? And that's not worth very much time, in my opinion. So I call him out on it, and I said this, I have too many replies to get to play with semantics. What are you after? Make your assertion, maybe we can make progress, okay? And that's kind of what I went with. This is one where you need to recognize, some people have had thoughtful replies, but some people are just taking shots. And his shot here is to just tell me what God, and then when I say, okay, I believe in the God of the Bible, he's like, you're answering the wrong question. If you think about how language works, you're answering the question, which God do you believe exists? I'm asking you, what God? Entirely different question. It's like, bro, I'm not going to sit here and play games with you. All right? I'm just not. So that one is one where you could have took it or leave it. We went a little further in conversation and got to some interesting ideas, but that's one where you can tell, like, they're just taking shot. This one says, it's called getting beyond indoctrination and abuse. Okay, now we've heard this claim a few times already, but he added abuse. Now listen to how he takes it further. If you're indoctrinated to believe that if you walk away from your God, you'll be punished for an eternity of fire, that's pretty brave, I'd say. Okay, so he's giving a thoughtful reply. Again, indoctrination and abuse, that feels a little strong to me, but I can understand what he's saying, and there's a reason I kept engaging with him. Now, Anit says, what about those, like me, who never accepted any superstition in the first place? Again, he calls it superstition right at the outset. Nothing to triumph about, nothing to notice, really. To me, gods are just a section under myths and mythical creatures, not nearly as interesting as mermaids. So obviously, what's he saying? Well, my experience was different. Okay, I am not claiming to speak for all atheists in my tweet, right? All atheists have gone through, no. Oftentimes people act as if they monolithically represent the position that they hold to, right? Like everybody who's an atheist came to the same conclusions the way they did. Everyone who's a Christian came to their conclusions the same way I did. That's not the case. And so when I make a tweet talking about many atheists, it doesn't necessarily mean that I think all atheists do that, right? Not at all. I don't quite understand the whole, you didn't describe my journey. Okay, move along then, right? Like, I don't know what to say, I didn't claim to describe everyone's journey. I'm glad you have a different journey, and maybe you can help us to have a better understanding based upon the path you took, but I don't know that you're not describing me is very constructive, right? So, just a thought, but I did engage. Now, this individual was thoughtful, but it was kind of, I had to wrestle with, do I take the time to engage with this or not? And my only issue was they threw out a lot of stuff, right? There's an approach in some of these conversations that I like to call the shotgun approach, okay? Now, what the shotgun approach is that we just kind of blast a whole shotgun spray and see what sticks, A shotgun approach is somebody who comes along and within the span of, 3 or 4 minutes in the conversation, they'll say the following arguments. Yeah, well, your book has been rewritten so many times that who knows what it's supposed to say anyway. And why believe in the existence of God? There's no evidence for him. And you know what? I can't believe that Christians are so immoral. They're such hypocrites. Why would you follow? You see what I'm saying? No time to engage in each individual comment. No time to engage in individual discussion. Just a shotgun blast. I often choose not to engage with that approach. Why? Because the individual usually doesn't want to have a sustained dialogue and isn't open to learning about any particular issue that they may be struggling with. They just want to fight a little bit. They just have their arguments. They're stored up for whenever they get into a situation like this, and they're just going to throw them at you. Okay, usually that's not worth my time, okay? So this individual displayed a little bit of that, which is part of why I didn't interact as much. So, they said it takes courage because of this reason. They're not afraid of your deity, but Christians are sometimes too aggressive. Your rhetorical style is bad. Stop quoting scriptures. Frequently, indoctrination gives people a sense of security, etc. I mean, he was on topic for a lot of it, but he also made some off-topic comments. And so I just didn't, and he replied a ton, which makes it really hard to keep up a sustained dialogue with. So I just decided to not engage with that topic. Okay, Beth said, it was such a relief when I stopped trying to believe. Forcing myself to be a Christian was so nerve-wracking and exhausting. I'm much happier as an atheist. If any God wants to prove themselves to me, they know what to do. Okay, well, hey, again, I thought that was a thoughtful remark and worth commenting on. Worth the interaction, okay? Now here's one that you need to discern, right? Marie said this: ignore science, cancer, parasitic worms, bubonic plague are beautiful. Now, here's the situation. I think I understand what he's saying. I think what he is saying is that Christianity and Bible-thinking people ignore science. And here are examples of how they ignore science. Now, I chose not to engage with this because this is just a shot, right? The other thing I think is happening here is I think we have a little bit of a language barrier, okay? This strikes me as somebody who's not a native English speaker. Now, they might be a native English speaker, but they strike me as someone who's not. Ignore science, cancer, parasitic worms, bubonic plague are beautiful. So I chose not to engage, but it's because I don't think we would be talking to each other or past each other. Okay? I think we would be talking past each other, and that's why I chose not to engage this one. Let's see the next one. This person said, somebody I know is currently having his 12-year-old daughter bullied and harassed over her right not to be religiously indoctrinated at school. You loving Christians are sure full of hate. Now, this one was questionable for me, okay? This one was questionable for me. Do I engage it? Do I not? And I chose to engage it just because I thought it would be fairly easy to just flip the script, right? So that's what I did. Someone I know is bullied because they believe in God and stand up for the Bible. Everyone has the potential to be persecuted for their beliefs. It merely depends upon their context. Now, when Christians do it, they're acting against their religion. It's not the religion's fault. Okay, so I chose to engage this one, but because I thought it was fairly easy to represent how this argument can cut in both directions. So that's why I went for it. But it is a questionable one. You can kind of tell, especially with you loving Christians are sure filled with hate, right? Religiously indoctrinated. You can tell that some of the language is really emotionally charged here. This person said no, because there is many cases of people telling their family they are atheists just to get disowned, also breaking through years of indoctrination. The only reason I didn't reply to this is because it's the same stuff, right? We've talked about having to leave your family. We've talked about indoctrination. This individual says, I realized inaccuracies and errors in the Bible and said if that is the word of God, it is a bad joke. I wouldn't accept that for a second. Prove he has given this eternity, please. It's not in my heart. This one I deliberately chose not to engage with for two reasons. First of all, I did not come on this comment. Really, I didn't come on here to argue with anybody at all anyway. But I definitely didn't come here to defend the accuracy of the scriptures. That's not what I was here to do, okay? And so he says this is why he left. Fine. And then not only that, he says, prove this to me, right? The second half of my tweet is explicitly Christian doctrine being used to interpret a phenomena that I recognize in the world. I don't have to prove that to you. In fact, that's not my goal. I didn't ask any of you guys to come here, right? I am tweeting out tweets to help Christians interpret the world within a Christian lens or a Christian worldview. You don't get to come in here and make demands of me that I am going to prove to you something or another. There you go, fire resistant. Now, don't get me wrong. In some context, I'm happy to have this discussion. But in context of this tweet, this is not where I'm going to, plant my flag in the sand, right? And say, okay, I have to rise to every occasion. No, I don't have to prove anything to you. And this is actually something that's going to come up over and over and over again. I can't tell you how many atheists came in and said, you don't get to make claims like that unless you first prove that God exists. You come out here and make these tweets, and you're assuming God exists, but you never proved him. I'm sorry, but at some point, a Christian has to be able to interpret the world within their worldview and make comments about it. I can't be required to go back to first principles and always, every single time, reestablish the existence of God every time I want to make a comment about the world. That's not how this works. You know what I mean? So you can't come in and tell me, prove this to me, prove that to me, prove this to me. No, I'm not required to do that. If you don't like my tweet as stands, move along. Right. Okay, Secular Penguin said, many have already answered why it took courage and bravery. I didn't see any that said it had anything to do with going against their nature, right? So the answer to your question is a hard no. Also, Ecclesiastes 3:11 is definitely not true for the vast majority of people I've discussed this with. Okay, so what's he saying? This wasn't going against what's he saying? I disagree with your scriptures. Okay, you know what I mean? No comment, right? You disagree with my scriptures. Gotcha, right? I don't disagree with my scriptures, so I'm going to continue to interpret the world from within my scriptures. So again, not worth responding to. Not for me, at least. I had to pick and choose, guys. It took me over 6 hours to respond to who I did. And so you're going to have to make calls, right? And if someone comes along and levels an argument that amounts to, I don't believe your Bible, okay, then we agree to disagree and move on. This person tried to trap me by bringing up another religion, right? So I'm not going to go into that. Nature says, I've never thought or said any of that. For me, it was a realization that religion is this, There are no gods. I've been lied to and misled my entire life by people who pretend to know what they're talking about, just as you know no more than I do about what follows death. And I just put one read, valid interpretation. Thanks for contributing. James, I found it super easy, but then I wasn't indoctrinated, potentially being expelled from family or hampering any close relationships. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go through every one of these. These are archetypes, right? I'll just highlight a few. Not against nature, against indoctrination, sometimes abuse. Leaving a cult is no simple thing, man. So, again, you're just hearing some of this. And so, a lot of people mostly just defending, this is why I left and you're wrong. Oh, here was an interesting one. Explain why any of this goes against my nature. Was anyone intrinsically born believing any of this stuff as a baby? And it's at this point that Ecclesiastes 3:11 and Romans 1:18 come to light, right? Because the Bible does teach that. The Bible teaches that everybody knows or believes on some level, in some way, shape, or form. Oh, here's a good one. Here's a good one. It's a triumph because we live in a world where ignorant, discriminatory people such as yourself have stigmatized people who believe differently than you, which perpetuates being ostracized or abused. So this is one I got a lot too. Direct attacks on me, okay? Now, what I tried to do was flip. I got these in two places, and I'm going to point them out on both, okay? I tried to flip it and get them to see that what they were charging me with, they were doing to me, okay? That's what I tried to get them to see. You've stigmatized people who believe differently than you, which perpetuates being ostracized or abused. That's precisely what they're doing to me. And that's why they say it's a triumph. So I put this. I said, in the circles I run in, Christians are stigmatized as being ignorant and discriminatory. I quoted them directly. We're ignorant and discriminatory, such as yourself, right? In the circles I run in, Christians are stigmatized as being ignorant and discriminatory. I guess I'm not sure what ostracization or abuse feels like, but if I did, I would think that it was something like that. If this street runs both directions, perhaps they cancel each other out. And here's what I was trying to get at. I was trying to get at, look, the same criticism that you're leveling against me, you are actually doing. You're doing the very thing you're criticizing me of doing. And if that's the case, if both sides are capable of being ignorant and discriminatory, then maybe that's not the foundational argument. And so these guys just blasted me. So I stopped engaging. But I did make one comment to try to get them to see the hypocrisy. Here was an interesting one. Why are you answering for atheists when there are millions of us who can answer for you? I'm not. I'm recognizing a phenomena out in nature, and I am simply interpreting that phenomena from within my Christian worldview. And that's what I put. I'm not answering for any of you. I'm noticing a societal behavior in a group of people and interpreting in light of my worldview. Everyone does this all of the time. Well, I think you'd be better off listening to the responses of actual atheists. Sure, I have done, am doing, and will continue to do just that. There ends up being a mistake when it comes to our discussions on these things, that if you don't agree with their interpretation of the data, you're just not listening to them. The atheists in these comments often had the approach that they are infallible when it comes to discerning their hearts, their motives, their direction, their purpose, etc. And for me to offer an alternate way of interpreting those facts is wrong from the start. I'm misrepresenting them. I'm not taking their thoughts into account, etc. So that came up over and over again as well. This guy I responded to just because I thought he was funny. No, it's because loads of religious people will persecute them for it. Wimp. Now, my point here, I was actually trying to point out, it's hard because you guys know I have a dry sense of humor, and irony does not come very well through via text, right? So I put, I like the final wimp. I wasn't initially convinced, but that really does it for me. When he added wimp. And then he said this. He couldn't get my joke. And he said the character assessment wasn't part of the argument. And so I thought I'd take one more shot, right? This was actually like a kind of an underhanded way of telling him I didn't think his argument was very good. And I said, it's a shame because that was the part of the argument I found most compelling. I was like, come on, like that. I think that's a pretty good shot, right? Thank you, Martin. See, Martin can appreciate it. And then, but he didn't get it, right? He just goes, you're getting wimpier by the tweet. Grow some or go away. And I was just like, all right, this isn't worth it. But I tried. I thought he was funny. The Drax of Twitter. It was pretty good. Oh, man. I really felt good about that tweet, honestly, and it just, he was too fast. He was too fast. So I gave up on that one. Here was a comment. You realize that in many places one could get killed for admitting and or announcing to being an atheist. That takes courage and willpower to get out of oppressing religious regime, combat years of indoctrination and herd mentality. This is something that was fascinating to me, guys. Here's something where you can learn a thing or two. I only ever hear about oppression and persecution in the church as we discuss Christians, right? Christians are persecuted in this area. They're oppressed over here. We have martyrs for the faith. Down through church history, on and on and on we go, right? I hear this all the time in Christian circles. So many atheists in my chat on this tweet felt oppressed and persecuted. That was insightful. I sure didn't plan that going in. And so that's something that's helpful, guys. I always think of atheists as being kind of the norm in culture and society, and atheists think of themselves as being rare, and that a lot of their description of coming to the faith of atheism, i.e. leaving their faith, is this took courage because it was such against the norm, such against culture. So that was something that was insightful to me, because I never conceive of persecution and oppression in those categories. I've always thought of it the other direction. Yeah, and it does go both ways, and that's what I kept trying to point out. Like, it's so funny because they were mocking me repeatedly, like, and it was, 40 against 1, right? And they're just repeatedly mocking me and criticizing me, and I'm the intolerant one. I'm the oppressive one. I'm the one that's a hater, right? So other ones, right? Like, these are just trying to get me off, like, what a meaningless load of old, and I don't know if that's a cuss word or not, but what a meaningless load of old, like, that's not worthy of a reply, right? So you accept Allah and his teachings then. So this guy is trying to take the fact that I believe in a holy book and he's trying to get me off on a different argument, not worth replying to. This is dumb. Why would going against one's nature feel triumphant? If everyone secretly believes in a single God and that belief is part of their nature, then acting against it should be painfully out of alignment with the rest of their nature. Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying, except for it's just less painfully obvious than what you're saying. But again, opening with this is dumb, I'm just not going to respond, right? No, because Jesus salesmen like you create literal cult environments in which members are all but brainwashed, not to question. Again, this is not what I do. That's fine. If that's your experience, okay, but it's not worth engaging in for me, right? Bad members of your church kick out their non-believing children, berate and punish them, otherwise discriminate. I'm not going to reply, okay? Maybe it's because society looks down on atheists. Again, interesting, because I've always thought of it the other direction. To me, it looks like society looks down on Christians, but that's just my perspective. Here's one of the ones I was talking about before. Dude, you can't even demonstrate God exists. Until you do so, you are a pastor of a fairy tale, right? Like, you're not allowed to make comments until you prove God to me. Sorry, no. Just no, right? You can't require me to prove God before I can make comments. I'm just going to make comments, right? So these were other ones. No, it's because idiots can't accept that others don't share their beliefs and so harass them. You have a favorite book. That's great. Keep it to yourself unless asked. No. You know what I mean? And again, not worthy of a response. Now, here's one last one that I thought was very, very interesting. This comes to the persecution perspective and that back and forth. Okay, listen to this. No, it's because society is filled with religious beeps like you who constantly demean us and try to make our lives beep. We saw a tweet like this before. And what did I try to do? I tried to flip it and say, what you claim I'm doing to you, you are doing to me. So I said that is certainly a partial explanation and one I am not happy about. So I granted that some people might act that way. And then I said this, but it seems to me that the street runs in two directions and sometimes it is the religious who are being attacked without being understood. I.e. like right now. That was my point, right? Perhaps we could all be better off if we would respect each other. So that's how I was trying to put it. Look, nobody should be demeaning others and trying to make anyone's lives horrible or anything like that. And then this one, this guy came to the rescue, right? Superhero comes flying in. This just in. Oppressor doesn't like it when persecuted minority stands up for themselves. Oh, now that's a good one, right? That's a good one. I am trying to call out that this person's behavior, exactly what they're condemning is what they're doing. And I get called an oppressor who doesn't like when somebody is standing up for themselves. So when I say something, I'm oppressing others. But when somebody else says something, they're just standing up for themselves. It's this kind of double standard that needs to be called out. And so I did. Pointing out inherent hypocrisy doesn't amount to doesn't like. Here's the illustration I used, and I felt it was apt. Okay? If my racist neighbor is angry at minority groups because he thinks that they're picking on him, it seems to me the first way I can help him is to encourage him to stop being racist. Follow the line of argument. If I have a racist neighbor and he's angry because minority groups pick on him, the first way I can help him is to tell him, if you weren't racist, they wouldn't pick on you, right? And to me, that strikes me as exactly what is going on here. You constantly demean us, you try to make our lives horrible, blah, 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 blah. You're an a-hole, all of this stuff. Well, you know what? If you didn't act that way towards me, perhaps you wouldn't get those responses, okay? And I think I was more than gracious given the attack that was leveled at me. So I thought that was an interesting one. Again, other ones like this, are you daft, deluded, dishonest, or dumb, right? I gave a slight response, but often these aren't worth responding to. Perhaps it's because you're a bunch of intolerant psychos. Probably not worth your time. Oh, shut up. Not worth your time, right? You're a moron if you believe any of that. Not worth your time. That concludes looking at all of the tweets as a whole and just giving you a sense of what I think is worthwhile and not worthwhile. In the final analysis, I'm going to engage in a conversation with somebody if I think that I can learn something from the conversation. If I think that I'm actually going to be better off from it, right? That is high on my list. Somebody who just calls me a moron, who tells me to shut up, etc. I'm not going to learn anything there, right? They don't want to engage in healthy dialogue. So, again, can I learn something? If so, I tended to go further in the conversation. Not only can I learn something, but can I be a good witness here? A good testimony, okay? And then finally, the third concern, is this something, can I be a good witness or testimony? But the other thing, am I setting a good example? Those are kind of my three parameters that I use to think about the concept. Now, here's what I want to do. I just want to summarize what I think some of my major learnings were from the conversation, okay? If I didn't learn anything from this, then it's a waste of time. I found a few things, so that this next part is all going to be about how can you approach discussing with atheists in a way that is more profitable because you can learn from my discussion, my Twitter war, okay? How can you profit from this discussion? Here's kind of my list. First of all, we are constantly talking past each other, okay? Constantly talking past each other. I brought it up in the beginning. My whole point about atheists who are triumphant was, again, your Dillahunties and your Dawkins, right? And everybody was like, no, it's because religious jerks and losing family. We're talking past each other, okay? Recognize when you're talking past somebody and try to reach that common ground. Try to have a better conversation, discussion, so that you guys can get on the same page. Now, I was told many times that I misrepresented them. What people need to understand at this point is that it's not misrepresenting if I merely described a position that wasn't your position, okay? That's not misrepresenting. I actually didn't misrepresent anyone. In the tweets, I was told I strawmanned people, I misrepresented people, etc. And I didn't do anything of the sort. I was targeting a particular type of atheist or somebody who goes through a particular situation. And I think you need to recognize that on both sides, there is very often a sense of you're misrepresenting us. No, you aren't a monolith, okay? For example, if somebody comes up with an argument against Christianity that relies upon a particular understanding of, baptism that you don't believe in, maybe they're not misrepresenting you. They're just not aware of the literature and the fact that there are multiple interpretations of that. So please try to have a better understanding and recognize that when you're talking to somebody or somebody is talking to you, not everybody's a monolith, okay? Not everybody represents the exact same position. And so you need to be able to have nuanced conversation with them and ask them what they think about the issues. The other thing I noticed, tribalism, guys. They constantly attacked Christians as being tribalistic and they themselves were acting in a tribalistic manner. What's tribalism? Tribalism is when you've got your group of people, this is my team, this is my tribe, and everybody else is the enemy. And I'm not actually going to consider each concept on its own. I'm not going to ask myself, well, does that make sense? Does that make sense? I'm not sure. Instead, I am going to say it's us versus them. I'm attacking anybody who isn't in my group. That's tribalism. And both sides can be just as guilty of it, okay? There were many atheists who made really poor comments against me or things like that who weren't called out by their constituents, okay? But if we're going to require that of this group, then we need to do that in our group, okay? If, for example, some of our Christians aren't doing a good job of responding or talking to others when it comes to apologetics or things like that, we need to call them out as well, right? We can't just embrace tribalism when it's convenient for us. We need to call it out on both fronts. Next one. What is indoctrination? One of the things I found at this point that you're going to run into, guys, is indoctrination is a big deal for atheists. Christians are just indoctrinating their children. That's what we're doing. We have to get a good definition of what indoctrination is, okay, if we're going to have this discussion. Because it's just assumed that what we do as Christians is indoctrinate. It's just assumed that that's the case. So I want to ask a couple of questions at this point. Are they objecting to the fact that we teach our children to believe what we believe? If that's the case, that's not indoctrination, because they do the very same things. And in fact, I actually had a tweet on here of somebody saying, well, it's because you indoctrinate. And I said, okay, let's define indoctrination. And it turns out they were essentially doing the very same thing they were criticizing Christians of doing. Let me see if I can find that one. What is indoctrination? Marcus really brought this one out. It's called getting beyond indoctrination and abuse. I said this: if my family teaches me that there is no such thing as God, that I'll have friends who believe in him, but they just don't know any better, is that indoctrination? Okay? So we're indoctrinating our kids by telling them to believe in God, telling them to believe in Jesus, teaching them about the Bible. We're indoctrinating our kids, but telling your kids God doesn't exist isn't indoctrination? He goes further. I can't speak for all atheists, but I would never teach my children they can't believe in God or gods or ghosts or Santa Claus. What I will teach them is how to think critically. If there's an argument for a God that can't be made for anything else, let's hear it. Okay, they often throw out this, make an argument, right? Well, here's what I put. I teach my children to think critically as well. That's one assumption. Only the atheists think critically and teach their children to think critically. Christians don't teach their children to think critically. They just indoctrinate. I'm sorry, but that's a false dichotomy. I constantly, if any of you guys attend my services, you know that I constantly tell people to think critically. The truth has nothing to fear. On and on it goes. So it is a caricaturization to say that Christians indoctrinate while we teach our children to think critically. And furthermore, when he says, I'm not going to tell them they can't believe in God, you, by virtue of the fact that you're not teaching them about God, are teaching implicitly that God is irrelevant, that God doesn't matter. Okay? Notice what I put. I teach my children to think critically as well. To not teach them about gods is to teach them that gods are unimportant through selection bias. It's unfortunately unavoidable, but I don't see any of it as indoctrination, okay? So here's my first comment. Teaching your kids to believe the same things you believe is not indoctrination. If it is, then everybody indoctrinates. Everybody does. You say, well, I teach my kids to think critically. You're not reading the Bible to them and teaching them the Bible. Through selection bias, you are teaching them that the Bible is unimportant. I've heard of people saying, well, I teach my kids they can come to their own conclusions, but mommy and daddy don't believe because they think it doesn't make sense. Well, then what do you think? You think the kid's going to be like, yeah, you know, mommy and daddy are really smart, but on this one, they're just dead wrong. I should investigate this Bible thing. No, of course not. It's unavoidable. You're going to teach your kids what you believe. It's going to happen, okay? So rather than pointing the finger and saying, stop indoctrinating, just recognize that everybody has to teach their kids what they believe. That's how it goes. It's just called being a parent. If you have the right to teach your kids what you believe, then I have the right to teach my kids what I believe. That's not indoctrination. So that can't be the test. I was told this. Indoctrination is teaching them something they can't question. Okay? They can't question. What does that mean? I can't conceive of that. I can't conceive of an environment, and maybe I'm ignorant at this point, I'll grant that. Well, what does it mean to be taught something you're not allowed to question? I don't understand. I tell all of my people to question everything I say. I always tell them to check it by the word. I tell them to constantly ask questions. I don't hide any realm of human knowledge from my congregants, and I won't do so with my children either. Maybe this happens to people, and maybe this is my limited experience and ignorance. I don't know, but I can't envision or imagine a scenario where you're just not allowed to ask questions. That just seems odd to me. Now, this might be true, and therefore that might be indoctrination. I don't know, but this just seems odd to me. Now, I was also told that indoctrination carries with it a threat of punishment, okay? Christian teaching to your children is indoctrination. Why? Because it carries with it the teaching about hell. It carries with it the concept that if you don't believe this, there is punishment that awaits. So it's indoctrination because the doctrine of hell goes with it. But I don't buy this either, okay? And I'll tell you why. If you don't believe in Christianity, there's eternal punishment that awaits. Fine, okay? That's a Christian teaching. First of all, I don't know about just trying to scare your kids into heaven that way. I think all of us could do with a robust doctrine of being born again, okay? Like if we all understood being born, you can't scare your children into heaven, guys. You can't just put the boogeyman into them so that they'll get into heaven. They need to be transformed by the regenerating power of the Holy Spirit. So stop hiding them from things, stop telling them they can't ask questions, and stop threatening them with eternal punishment if they don't believe what you tell them they have to believe, okay? They need to be regenerated. They need the Holy Spirit. So I don't understand these threats and different things like that. But I do want to challenge this whole threat of punishment idea. They basically saying because of the Christian doctrine of hell, what you do amounts to indoctrination. But I would say that same argument applies, but in reverse, to the atheist. Why? Because of the atheist doctrine of not heaven, your particular teachings promote indoctrination. Do they not? In your teachings, there is no heaven. If you believe our teachings, you don't go to heaven. To me, that's the same threat, but just reverse. You're being told that there is no heaven and you have to embrace that. That's part of your teaching. Christian teaching says there's a hell. Atheist teaching says there's a not heaven, that when you die, you're just dead. It seems to me like both of those teachings threaten something. It seems to me like believing both of those teachings has some sort of threat of punishment. If you believe the way we believe, there's no heaven. Sorry. If you believe the way we believe, then you end up going to hell. Sorry. How are those any different? To me, they're the same. They're a threat of punishment. So I think the argument can be leveled in both directions, and therefore, I just don't see the strength of it. I'm not for scaring children to believe in Jesus. I'm not for that. I want that to be known on the record. But I also don't think we should just throw the threat of punishment doctrine out the window because somebody says it amounts to indoctrination. It seems to me that atheists do the very same thing, but just in reverse, because they don't have a heaven. I don't know. That's my understanding of that. So the indoctrination issue was a big deal. And I think I kind of covered that, at least my opinions or perspectives on it. Now let's talk about persecution. I thought this one was very, very interesting because there is a discussion that persecution seems to go both directions. Christians are criticized as being persecutory towards atheists. And then atheists, I think, demonstrate that they often persecute Christians. And so there's this persecution thread that keeps running through. I think we would all be better off if we could just have a conversation. I think we would all be better off if we could have a discussion. And it wasn't at all about shouting down or criticizing those who believe differently than you. And instead was about having that profitable conversation. Both sides can claim persecution. I think it depends on your context and what area of the world you're in. Both sides can claim it. I want you to know, and this might be a false narrative, okay? This might be a false narrative, okay? But please step into the shoes of the Christian here. First of all, we have a history of persecution. That's true. Christians have been persecuted for a long, long time, okay? And I don't mean in modern societies in particular. I mean since the inception of Christianity. Nero and other Roman officials heavily persecuted Christians. This is easily documented in church history, right? Now, as Constantine established Christianity to be a state religion, and as it expanded and grew in power and authority, especially through the Roman Catholic Church, that became less and less the case. So we go past that into the Middle Ages and into the Reformation period, and now Christianity is very powerful, okay? Now Christianity is very powerful. But there's a narrative that a lot of Christians like to tell themselves and like to tell others in general, that ever since the Enlightenment, religion has been on the downturn, and it is essentially the ascendant secular worldview that has now begun to look down its nose at Christians, okay? And so Christians often view that as persecution. And when Christians have certain worldview perspectives or ideas that they think are biblical, and they express those publicly and in the marketplace, and they're shut down, shouted down, etc., it's hard for them not to revert back to their roots and say we're being persecuted. Christians have certain ideals and perspectives, worldview ideas, concepts, etc., and many of those are not in vogue right now. So many Christians think of those things as persecution, okay? Now, I'm not saying they're necessarily right, but that is a lot of what's going on. It does seem to me, and I agree with Ivory John on this point, that this word is being bandied about far too, far too nonchalantly, uncritically, right? People are just throwing the persecution card everywhere, right? I tend to think almost nobody is being persecuted, right? Disagreement isn't persecution. I am not infringing upon your rights because I disagree with you. Flippantly. Thank you, Martin. That's the word I was looking for. That's not persecution, okay? We should be able to disagree and have conversation. That should be allowed, right? It's not persecution for me to say I don't agree with your statement or your stance or your worldview or your lifestyle or whatever. That's not persecution. We need to get over that. We become really soft. And I mean this for Christians too. Christians do this just as much. So there are two narratives that kind of run around here. All right, let's finish this off, guys. Couple more ideas. Here was one big problem, guys. This came up in a huge manner, and I want to review it, okay? Let's go to my original tweet, and notice what I say. I take a Christian worldview and apply it to a phenomena that I see of atheists responding to certain ideas, okay? They have courage and bravery to deny God in the afterlife. Why does this seem like a triumph? It goes against their nature. God has put eternity into the heart of man. Guys, it is a very clear biblical teaching that we have a sense of God in our hearts and in our lives, okay? So Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. There's a variety of interpretations of this passage, but most say something along the lines of, we all have a sense of life after death, or that things will persist in the future, or that we're going to have some sort of afterlife, right? That is a wide variety of the interpretation. Yeah, I love that, Ivory John. A sense of there is more than just this. Okay, we all have that sense, okay? And this lines up with Romans 1, right here. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. You can't suppress something you don't have. And it says they suppress the truth. It continues, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them, okay? So the Bible teaches that all human beings have a sense of there is more than this. And the Bible teaches that people who deny this are suppressing the truth because what is known about God is made plain to them because God has made it plain to them. Okay? That's what the Bible teaches. All right? The way some have put this, the unbeliever is a believer. Okay? In some sense. All right? Oh boy. This is standard biblical doctrine. This is standard biblical truth. I teach this regularly. I got destroyed on Twitter because I would suggest this. I got absolutely destroyed. Let me show you some of the comments surrounding my statements that there is a true belief, even if it isn't granted. Let's look at some of these comments here, guys. So Ben says, coming out as an atheist can cause one to lose family, friends, and jobs because Christians are so intolerant of anyone who thinks differently than them. That's why it's a triumph. It has nothing to do with their nature. Statements like this are a big part of the problem. I asked him, why is this a big problem? That others might interpret things from a different perspective? I tend to think that a refusal to see things from someone else's perspective is a much bigger societal problem, contributing to divisive tribalism. For example, your comment is insightful and contributed to my understanding in a way that I hadn't considered. I'm glad that I listened to what you had to say rather than sticking with my narrow perspective. I'm now forced to refine and rethink my perspective. Okay? So I said, that's good. Why can we not challenge what others bring up? Listen, here's what he says. It's this, how dare you presume to tell me what I believe? Okay? And he's not the only one that brought this up. Listen, your initial comment does something that apologists do all the time, namely assume the mental state of an atheist. Something similar is said to me quite often, that I really do believe in God, but I'm just denying it. It feeds into the anti-atheist narrative, okay? So this concept, this biblical doctrine that the unbeliever really has some sense of God, really believes in eternity in their heart, something like that, is very, very antagonistic for the atheist, okay? And that's something I didn't realize, right? It's just, it's a doctrine I assume. I read the Bible after all, right? But that part of my comment, that they're acting against their nature and they really know that God exists, this was very incendiary to people who disagreed with me on this topic. Ardent says, that is obviously not true because the Bible also says some people don't believe in God. And I bring up Romans 1:18. Who suppress the truth, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. Then this guy jumps in. The point that you're beating around the bush about is that you're calling us liars. Do you see that? How dare you presume to tell me what I actually believe? You're calling me a liar. You're telling me I actually believe in God, but outwardly in the world, I am telling people I don't. You're calling me a liar. Just admit it. No. That's not what we're saying at all. But I want you to know some atheists think that that's what you're saying about them when you quote Romans 1, Ecclesiastes 3:11, etc. They think that you're calling them a liar, right? Please recognize that. So I had to correct that. Listen. Not at all. Human beings are creatures made up of many more aspects than simply the rational brain. I fully believe that atheists are telling the truth that they don't believe in God. I'm merely suggesting that on some alternate level of their being, they also do believe. Okay? So I'm trying to show, hey, you're a complex creature, and because of that, you have different facets and aspects. And listen to this individual. Can't have it both ways, pal. Do you see that? Either you're calling us a liar or your Bible isn't true. That's it. Those are the only two options. So I'm trying to respond to this and help them to see. Sure, I can. Imagine a mother that defends their child from the school saying he bullies kids, but she also hides her purse from him. And this is where a limited number of characters was getting in my way. That illustration doesn't make sense to them, and I have to flesh it out later. There are iterated beliefs, higher and lower levels. We have beliefs about belief. We think we are infallible about what we believe, but we aren't. All of these things are true. Okay, guys? And this is a very important aspect for dealing with atheists because you need to recognize that your Bible teaches that on some level they recognize the existence of God, but they are going to sit there and vehemently deny that to you and claim that you're calling them a liar if you don't grant that to them. Okay? So let's listen. He says, what does a bad kid have to do with belief or disbelief in God? I'm not following you here. You either believe me when I say I don't believe in God or you don't. Which is it? And I go through a long explanation, and I'm going to read it all off to you because it's so important to understand these illustrations for whether or not people believe things. Okay? So just hear me out. I said, it's really difficult with so few characters. I'll do my best to explain. My fundamental assertion is that not all beliefs function on the same level with the same set of justification in the same ways. I'll give two examples. Imagine a woman's son is bullying other kids at school. She has been called in to the principal on several occasions, but she always defends Johnny. Finally, they expel him and she moves to get him into another school. She is eager to defend the reputation of her little angel. However, at the same time, she refuses to allow Johnny to be alone with her purse in the same room. Every time she allows that to happen, her cash goes missing. Does the mom believe that Johnny is an angel or not? While it is possible that she is a hypocrite, I suggest another interpretation. The mom simultaneously believes both that Johnny is an angel and that he is a thieving brat. She is having a hard time reconciling these, but her behaviors demonstrate that she knows both of these things are true. Illustration number 2. Your boss is a champion of equality in the workplace. He is always talking about the rights of others and how we need to have a diverse workforce. He consistently promotes diverse people and gives them a wide range of opportunities. However, you are also friends with him outside of work. Whenever you guys have a few drinks together, he makes more and more jokes that are racist and sexist. They seem to be his favorite kind. While it is possible that he is a hypocrite, I suggest another interpretation. Your boss or friend simultaneously believes in equality and has a racist or sexist underpinnings. My point is this. I am not forced into a false dichotomy where either atheists are liars or the Bible is false. We know that human beings are much more complicated than that. We hold a whole mass of beliefs all at once, and oftentimes many of these are in tension with or even contradict each other. We aren't merely brains on a stick that evaluate logical propositions and that's it. We're complicated. Okay? Very, very important to recognize. This is what we mean. And the atheist hears us saying, no, but you really believe. You actually believe in your heart of hearts. And they hear us calling them a liar. They hear us saying that you're not being truthful or honest with us. But that's not at all what we're saying. What we're saying is that human beings are complex. And here's, I actually think, where the rub is in the situation. Almost all atheists are naturalistic materialists. Almost all of them. And what is a naturalistic materialist after all? They believe that we're just one thing. You don't have a soul. You don't have a spirit. You don't have any of that according to an atheist. What do you have? You have a brain. That's it. Your brain is all you are. Your brain dictates everything about you, what you believe, how you think. And atheists, because they don't believe that you're a complicated creature, they believe you're just a brain, they don't have any conception of, hey, you might believe contradictory ideas or thoughts. You might believe things that go against yourself. No. They think they're the ultimate arbiter of what they think. They think they're completely, perfectly, rationally in control of all of their faculties, and there are no problems or issues when it comes to their thought processes. They think in that sense that, they're able to discern, this is what I believe, this is what I don't believe. And how dare you presume to tell me that I am wrong about my own beliefs? How dare you, right? Why? Because they're naturalistic materialists. This is something you need to recognize is part of the disagreement, okay? This is part of what contributes to Christians and atheists talking past each other at this point. I'm going to go back to my previous conversation with one of the atheists on this topic. I paused in the middle of the conversation. I'm going to go back to it now so you can see how we ended. Myself and Ben. Ben says, your initial comment does something that apologists do all the time, namely assume the mental state of the atheist, right? You're assuming what I believe. Something similar is said to me quite often. I really do believe in God, but I'm just denying it. It feeds into the anti-atheist narrative. Okay? Let's go to how I responded. I said, no, it assumes that the Bible is true in what it teaches about human beings. Now, I will grant that it teaches things that are contrary to some atheistic assertions, but there is more going on here than merely a mental state. I think one of the primary issues here is that Christians assume that we are complicated creatures with a soul and spirit, and as such, often believe contrasting ideas, while the atheist assumes that we are only material creatures with a brain and a system that is completely explained entirely materially. This leads to Christians making claims about what you really believe, while atheists are offended because we are presuming to tell you what you believe. Thanks for the comment. This was insightful. And here's what he said, guys. After all of this conversation, what did Ben say? I think you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly the problem. I hear from apologists quite often about what I really believe. They usually cite Psalm 14 or Romans 1, completely failing to see the irony of using a book I don't believe in to try and prove my beliefs. Okay? But there we go. Now we can see where some of the criticism is coming from. It's the fact that they view the world materially. They don't view it in any other or more complicated a way than that. Okay? And I'm going to finish now. Atheistic Snail jumped in and made some comments, right? So I want to finish our conversation here because I think, again, it lends insight at this point. I said, we aren't merely brains on a stick that evaluate logical propositions and that's it. We're complicated. Atheistic Snail says, we're complicated. There's a lot of research saying that we are. You are using that research to make claims you can't prove. You are claiming we're unknowing liars. Again, he brings this back out again. All atheists everywhere, unknowing liars. Okay? So, I go further and try to push my point. Remember the two illustrations I brought up. I think it makes perfect sense. My next comments make perfect sense if you understand the two illustrations I brought up. I think that is a mischaracterization. 90% of my job when counseling people is helping them work through beliefs that they hold on a deep level that they are completely unaware of. People with a victim mentality, for example, are often completely unaware that they fall into this sort of negative thought pattern. Psychology's primary task is helping people work through these limiting beliefs that they don't even know that they have. Are atheists exempt from this? Are they so enlightened that they cannot fall victim to common ailments that plague us all? No, we are not. But you have not proven that some universal truth of God's knowledge exists. You're just asserting it. Psychology has to prove the things it is helping are real, and that its advice works. It doesn't, in modern times, get to assert without evidence. Oh, so my interpretation is possible, but he doesn't like it because I'm making an assertion. And I put it right here. It is not my intent to prove God's existence at any point in this conversation. I am merely offering one read, a Christian read of the situation as I see it. At some point, people need to be able to make bare assertions in the marketplace of ideas. Okay? That needs to happen at some point. I can't be told you have to return to first principles every time you want to make an assertion. That's not how this rolls. Okay? And I linked them to my... I put right here, I cannot be required to substantiate bare principles every single time I have a thought regarding my understanding of the world. In case you care, I have done that elsewhere. And I linked them to my 4-video playlist on proof for the existence of God. But that was a major issue in our conversation. This issue of presuming to tell people what they really believe. How dare you tell me what I believe, right? That came out over, you're calling us liars. You're calling all of us liars. No, not at all. Final point I want to make on this, guys. Engaging with atheists. I noticed this over and over again. You saw it in the last comment. There's often a prove God fallacy. Almost every atheist wants to drive the conversation back to, you need to prove God first. You can't make comments about this unless you prove God first. You haven't proved the existence of God. You're just asserting it, right? And you saw my comment in the last tweet. At some point, I have to make bare assertions in the marketplace. I can't open every tweet with, I believe in the existence of God. Here is a proof for the existence of God. Do you believe in him yet? Oh, you do now? Therefore, I can now make a tweet coming from a Christian worldview. Nah. At some point, I'm going to make assertions from within my own worldview, and people are going to take it or leave it. If you don't believe God exists, and therefore that my tweet is nonsense, so be it. Don't read my tweet. Or you can read my tweet, but you don't agree with it. Fine. But there are plenty of people out there in the world who do believe God exists. And when I have that as an assumption built into my tweet, then they're happy to go along with it because they already believe it. The fact of the matter is everybody operates from some base set of bare principles through which they interpret the world, and they proceed from there. And they don't have to substantiate their bare principles every single time they get into a conversation with someone. Sometimes they just assert them. Now, I have elsewhere made arguments for the bare principles that I assert and that I believe in. I have done that elsewhere. But I can't be required to do that every single time that I make a comment, make a tweet, post a video, etc. It's a ridiculous requirement and expectation. And so don't fall into that trap. You'll probably have some atheists that you interact with make comments like that. You have to prove to me God exists. No, you don't. Now, it might help in the conversation, etc. But you don't have to do that every single time you get in a conversation with somebody, And so just recognize that. Don't fall into that trap. It's a baited trap. Don't fall into it. Okay, guys. Well, that's all I've got. Just a brief discussion, very brief, on engaging with atheism. Two things to keep in mind. Examples of how to engage with people who are disagreeing with you, especially vehemently so, when you have limited time. And then also just common pitfalls and issues you might run into as you engage with atheists. I think both of those things came out pretty clearly in tonight's discussion. It was very helpful and beneficial to me. I hope it was helpful and beneficial to you guys. Hey, thanks for watching that entire video. We have a lot of videos on this channel relating to various topics and different content that you might like. This entire playlist actually has several videos that are about a similar topic to this one. And if you check out the links in the description below, you'll be able to support what we do here on Patreon, or you can join our communities on Discord and Twitch. Before you go, would you please consider clicking the subscribe and like buttons down below? Then you won't miss any new videos. Thank you so much. Take care. God bless. Bye now.